I've inspected buildings for 26 years, and in all that time, I learned exactly one rule that never broke. The paper and the building always agree. If the file says 8 floors, you walk 8 floors. If it says 48 apartments, you count 48 doors. The math closes every time. That is the whole reason my job exists, to stand inside a real place, hold up the paper written about it, and confirm they're the same thing. There is one building in this city where they are not the same thing. Every document the government has ever produced says it has 8 floors. I stood on that sidewalk with a laser and a steel tape and measured it 9. And somebody had been living on that 9th floor, the one that's on no plan, holds no permit, the one that legally is not a place, for 50 years. I didn't work that out from a strange noise or a cold feeling on the back of my neck. I'm not built that way. I work in numbers. I worked it out because somebody up there kept ordering groceries. They still are. I checked last week. Let me tell you how a careful man spends 3 weeks talking himself out of his own tape measure, and what was standing in the hallway when he finally stopped. The job came in the ordinary way. A development group bought the place cheap. Old brick walk-up on the tired end of town, thrown up fast in the early 70s. Full-gut renovation planned. Strip it to the bones, luxury units. The story you've heard 100 times. Before any of that, somebody does the existing conditions inspection. That's me. I go through top to bottom and document what's actually there, so the buyer knows what they bought, and the city knows what it's permitting. Slow, filthy work. Nobody has ever once thanked me for it. The file was thin and clean. Built 1972. 8 residential floors over a basement. 1 elevator, 2 fire stairs, 48 units. A certificate of occupancy older than I am. I start every job in the basement, because the basement is where a building stops lying. The lobby is makeup. The basement is the autopsy. And the basement is where I caught the first thread that wouldn't lie still. The water meters, a long steel row, 1 per apartment, so the landlord can bill each tenant separately. I was reading them against the records, hunting for leaks. The dullest work there is. The records listed 48 meters. I counted 49. Now here's a thing most people don't know. Submeters like these don't talk to the water company. The city only ever sees 1 master meter for the whole building. Whatever these little dials count, the landlord bills in-house himself. Nobody outside that basement would ever have a reason to know a 49th even existed. 48 of them read what you'd expect. Some high, some low. 2 sitting dead at 0 for empty units. But the 49th had a number on it that was climbing. Slow and steady, then a small jump. The kind you get when somebody opens a tap or a toilet refills. The signature of a place where a person washes dishes and takes a shower at the end of the day. Somebody was using water in an apartment that the building's own records swore did not exist. I had my comfortable explanation ready before I'd even straightened up. A double-assigned meter. 2 of them wired to 1 apartment by a sloppy plumber 40 years ago. It's a real thing. It happens. I felt the relief of it. So I traced the line, just to close it out. Followed that 49th riser up the central chase as far as I could reach. It didn't branch off at any of the 8 floors. It kept climbing past my access, into the ceiling above the 4th floor, into the dark, carrying water up to nobody at all. I'll come back to that 49th meter. It matters more at the end than it did in that basement. The building manager was a heavy-set, worn-out man I'll call Ray. 30 years of running other men's buildings had sanded every edge off him. Nothing surprised him. I asked him about the 49th apartment. "There's 48, he said, without looking up. I showed him the meter, the water climbing on a unit that wasn't on his rolls, and I watched something cross his face that I didn't understand for weeks. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't quite fear. It was the look of a man hearing a word he'd been told a long time ago, never to repeat out loud. Then it was gone. He shrugged. "Old meters double up. Renovation's gonna rip it all out anyway." I asked for the rent roll. 48 lines. Clean, except for one more entry at the very bottom, typed in a font that didn't match the rest. Newer, added in some later decade by a different machine. Unit 4M. It had been added later than the rest of the list. I noticed it and moved on. I shouldn't have. I asked Ray what 4M was. "Storage," he said. "Or a typo. Predates me." I asked to see it. He told me the key was lost, bored, casual, the way you'd say it about a broom closet. But he said it to the wall. He couldn't say it to my face. And a man who's read rooms for 26 years notices when another man can't meet his eyes over a missing key. I went up to find 4M myself, because an apartment has to physically be somewhere. The 4th floor ran 4A through 4F. 6 doors, clean, no 4M. The hall just dead-ended at a fire stair, so I went back to the lobby and counted the mailboxes, because by then I was counting everything like a man who'd lost his faith in paper. 49 brass doors. 48 had numbers, most had name cards, and one, down in the bottom corner, had no number and no name, just a keyhole. A keyhole worn shiny, worn in that specific way. A thing gets worn when a key slides in and turns and comes back out, over and over, day after day, for years and years and years. A storage closet's mailbox doesn't wear. Storage closets don't get mail. I crouched there a long time, and I built my second theory, and this one felt airtight. An illegal unit. Some landlord, decades ago, carved an apartment out of leftover space and rented it for cash off the books. It is one of the most common code violations there is. It explained the water, the worn box, Ray's nerves, all of it. That theory lasted right up until I got in the elevator. The panel had 8 buttons and a B. I rode it, just feeling the trip. And every single time, between the 4th floor and the 5th, the car took too long. So I timed it, because I'm me. Floor to floor anywhere else. About 4 seconds, 4 to 5, closer to 7. An elevator runs at one constant speed. If a single hop between 2 adjacent floors takes nearly twice as long as every other hop. There is only one thing in the world that can mean. The distance between those 2 floors is nearly twice as far. That killed the illegal unit theory dead. You don't run an elevator past a hidden room. This wasn't a closet somebody carved out of spare space. This was a whole floor's worth of height that the building had been built to pass over in the dark. I wrote it up one more time and laid my hand flat on the wall during those 7 seconds. I don't know what I expected. I felt a wall going by, smooth, then a seam, then smooth again, a floor sliding past my palm. The blueprints came out on my kitchen table that night, and I went looking for the gap. It was right there. On the section drawing, the building cut open from the side like a layer cake. There was a band of space drawn between the 4th and 5th floors, and it had a label. Mechanical interstitial non-occupiable. A service level. A floor between floors for running ducts and pipe. It's legitimate. Hospitals have them. And because it's non-occupiable, it doesn't count as a story. No units, no occupancy, no number. On paper, it isn't a floor at all. It's just the building's guts. There was my explanation, for the third time. No hidden ninth floor, just a mechanical space with some illegal unit jammed inside it. I went to bed, and I lay there doing the one thing I have never been able to stop. Math. A mechanical interstitial is short. 3 feet, 4. Tall enough to crawl through with a wrench. The elevator had measured that gap at nearly a full story. 11 feet, maybe more. You do not build an 11-foot crawl space. 11 feet is not where you run a duct. 11 feet is where a person stands up straight and hangs a picture and lives. The blueprint wasn't the answer. The blueprint was the lie. Somebody drew a real, full, habitable floor and labeled it non-occupiable. And the label was the entire trick. Call a floor a crawl space, and no fire marshal ever inspects it as housing. No occupancy count includes it. No census ever knocks on its doors. It doesn't get hidden behind a secret wall. It gets renamed out of existence with one word on a drawing. That was the night I stopped trying to explain the floor and started trying to find out who was on it. The maintenance records came first because a building keeps a diary without meaning to. Decades of work orders boxed in the basement, never read by anyone. I read them. 3 nights, dust in my throat, deciphering dead men's handwriting under a bare bulb. The orders for the floor that doesn't exist go back further than I'd let myself imagine. A radiator, 1984. Location written in 9 Center. A clogged drain, 1991, 9C. A window air conditioner that couldn't be installed again and again across the years. No exterior wall, C Super, because the floor is buried in the core and has no outside wall to put a window in. And then I found the one I had to set down and walk away from for a while. A work order from the 90s. A stove burner out, and in the notes, in a maintenance man's blunt pencil. 9C tenant elderly, lives alone, please rush, can't cook otherwise. She. Up to that word, this had been a puzzle. Meters and seconds and math that wouldn't behave. The instant I read she, it became a person. An old woman, on a floor no map admitted, who couldn't make her own dinner because a burner had died. And a maintenance man who knew her by sight, who wrote please rush, because he cared whether she ate that week. The building knew she was there. The men who fixed her stove knew. The diary the building kept by accident had known her for decades. Only the records said she wasn't there. Only the documents that decide whether a human being is allowed to exist. So I went to the records, city archives, the basement where they keep the paper nobody has ever bothered to scan. I pulled the full construction jacket, every original form from 1971 forward, not the clean summary in my file. The summary said 8 floors. The jacket told the truth in what was missing from it. The original 1971 building permit was gone. Not crossed out, torn out, a ragged corner where a page used to be. But the fee schedule stapled behind it survived, and back then the city charged by the story, and the fee that was paid in 1971 was for 9. Then a stop work order, summer 1972. Reason, structural pending review. And 3 weeks after that, a revised permit, new stamp, new number, and a new floor count, 8. They didn't tear a floor out. You can't quietly remove a floor from the middle of a standing building. I'd felt it slide past my hand. They renumbered it. Between one permit and the next, 3 weeks apart, A residential story became mechanical. And from that day to this one, every record the city ever made said 8. I found the why on microfilm at the library. A 4-paragraph story, page 11, summer 1972, a construction incident. A poured concrete floor had failed during the work, a slab collapse. The paper said workers were injured, named the developer, a politically wired outfit that built half the cheap housing in this town, and said the city was reviewing the matter. Then nothing. No inquest, no lawsuit. For an accident bad enough to halt a whole building, the story just evaporated. So there it was, a slab failure that should have condemned the structure and ended careers, buried by renaming the damaged floor mechanical. So no inspector would ever look at it as housing again. A cover-up. Ugly, but a cover-up, I understood. It still didn't explain the old woman in 9C. A condemned, walled-off floor is empty, sealed, dead. It does not have somebody in it cooking dinner. And then I found the folder that turned the whole thing inside out. It was a thin one near the back. A carbon copy, faded purple ink. The kind of machine made before any of us were born. A housing authority memo, dated 1973, the year after the floor disappeared. It listed this building, and beside it, 2 words I read 3 times before they'd hold still. Interim placements, and below that, a line. Hollow Street redevelopment. I knew Hollow Street, or I knew of it, because it isn't there anymore. It was a neighborhood, a few blocks of working families that the city demolished in the early 70s to run a road through. Urban renewal, they called it. They tore it down, and they made promises. Replacement housing, relocation. The city would take care of the people it was putting out of their homes. This was where some of them went, not into the permanent housing they were promised. That was coming, supposedly. They were placed, on an interim basis, into a floor that had conveniently stopped existing 3 weeks earlier. A floor with no occupancy limit, because it had no occupancy. No fire inspection, because it wasn't a place. No lease, no count, no record. The perfect spot to set down a promise you weren't sure you could keep. A few months, it was supposed to be, until the permanent units were built. I went looking for the permanent units, because there's a paper trail for those too. The project was funded, then half-funded, then deferred, and then in a budget cycle in the late 70s, quietly zeroed out. A line item that one year just wasn't in the budget anymore. No vote, no villain, a number that stopped getting typed. And nobody ever moved the families out of the interim floor, because moving them out would have required a document that admitted they were in it, and no such document could exist. The entire point of that floor was that nobody was on it, so they stayed. The temporary thing became the only thing there was, and I sat in that cold archive understanding, for the first time, that this was never really about hiding bad concrete. The concrete just gave them the floor. What they did with the floor was hide people. I needed someone who had actually been up there. I found the man who serviced that elevator for 30 years. A retired union mechanic I'll call Sal. 80s now. A place out by the lake. A mind like a bear trap. I gave him the address. The line went quiet so long I thought I'd lost him. "You found the lockout?" he said. Not a question. I drove out. He told me the elevator had a modification that isn't standard, a key switch in the car, the kind only service crews carry, that would let the car answer a call to a floor with no public button. He never went in. They told the crews it was mechanical. and you didn't ask. But here's what an elevator man knows, Sal said. You read the doors, the rollers, the grease worn off the rails where the doors track open and shut. A mechanical floor. Those doors open maybe twice a year for service. That floor's doors were worn like a turnstile at rush hour, open and shut, all day, every day, for 50 years. He looked down at his hands. Only people wear a door like that, going in, coming out, living. I asked if he ever turned the key. Once, he said, and then he was quiet a while, and I let him be. Took the early pension that same year, he finally said. There's things you'd rather be paid to forget you saw. After Sal, the whole ordinary world started confirming it, one witness at a time, and that's the part that got into my chest and stayed there, the mail carrier. I watched that worn brass box for 3 days, and on the third day she came through and filled the bank. I caught her after, asked about the bottom one with no name. She didn't even blink. Oh, the bottom one's just a drop. I leave whatever's marked for the building. The super sorts it from there. I asked what went in it. She shrugged. Catalogs, mostly, she said. The kind addressed to occupant, that don't need a name or anything you'd call a real address. Junk that finds every slot in America. Some of it had been coming so long the paper had gone soft. The grocer, 3 blocks over. Family place, paper ledgers in the back. The old man never trusted a computer in his life. I asked if they'd ever run a standing order to that address. He found it in 10 minutes. A weekly order, cash on delivery, going back, in his father's hand, and then his own, more than 40 years. Side door, 49. And then he said the thing that put a stone in me, without my asking for it. Funny, he said, turning pages. This order used to be big, way back. He ran his finger up an early column. Kid food, cereal, the sugar kind, juice boxes, a lot of mouths. He turned forward, decade by decade. Then it shrinks, every few years, a little smaller. He stopped on a recent page and tapped it. Now it's about enough for one person, one old one. Soft stuff. Things you don't need teeth for. 40 years of a whole community being born, growing up, growing old and thinning out, recorded by pure accident in a grocer's ledger. A floor that once ordered cereal for a house full of children, worn all the way down to soft food for a single old woman. I asked the grocer if he ever wondered who he'd been feeding all those years. He looked at me like the question had never once occurred to him. Order comes in, we fill it, they pay cash. Why would I wonder? I didn't have an answer for him. Nobody in this whole thing had ever once had to wonder. That was the part that kept me up at night. The city had been told about that floor, too, over and over for decades. I pulled the non-emergency complaint logs, footsteps overhead, reported by tenants who had nothing above them, cooking smells through a vent from a floor with no kitchen, and one from 1996 that I read 4 times. A 5th-floor tenant reporting a child crying somewhere below my floor for hours, late at night. The floor below her is 4. 4 has no child's room anywhere near that spot. Every complaint carried the same disposition. Investigated, no cause. Found. Structural noise. Unfounded. Closed, closed, closed. For 50 years, the city received reports of a floor that walked and cooked and cried, and stamped each one away, because the only alternative was to write down that the floor was there, and the floor was not permitted to be there. The freight elevator footage was the last piece, a few weeks of cheap storage. Late at night, the freight car would open on the ground floor with nobody calling it from the lobby. Groceries left at the side door would be gone by morning. And once, the camera caught the floor indicator over the doors while the empty car sat open. It read 9. The building has 8 floors. The panel only goes to 8. I'd checked it with my own hands 100 times. It read 9. That was the morning Ray found me in the basement and told me, almost gently, to stop. The building had a confusing history. I'd gotten turned around in old records. A man with my pension shouldn't tie himself in knots right before a big job a lot of important people were waiting on. And then he said the thing that told me he'd known the whole time exactly how far I'd gone. That freight elevator's temperamental, he said. The service key sticks. Be careful you don't get stuck somewhere you can't get back from. I had never told Ray I'd touched the freight elevator. I had never told a living soul about the key switch. He knew. The carrier knew. The grocer's father knew. Sal knew. The whole chain knew. All the way up to whoever signed 8 in 1972. I had never once been a step ahead of any of them. They had been standing at the top of the stairs the entire time, patient, watching me climb toward them. I'll be honest about what I did next, because it broke a rule that exists for good reasons. Sal had mailed me his old service key 3 days after I left his place. No note. Just the key in an envelope, like he wanted it out of his house. I think he knew I'd use it. One night, after the building went quiet, I took the freight elevator. I put Sal's key in the switch, turned it, and pressed the dead spot above the 8. The car rose and kept rising past where 5 should be, into those long, dark seconds I'd timed from the lobby 12 times. Then it slowed, stopped. The number over the doors lit the one that isn't supposed to be on that panel. 9. The doors opened. I had spent 3 weeks proving this floor was real with water meters and grocery ledgers and a stopwatch. None of it readied me for the doors actually opening. A hallway, runner carpet, worn pale straight down the middle from 50 years of feet, warm yellow light from old fixtures, a row of doors with brass numbers, 9A, 9B, 9C, no windows, anywhere. The first thing my training screamed, a residential floor with no daylight, no outside wall, no second way out, because they'd buried it in the center of the building when they sealed it. People had lived their entire lives up here, and never once seen the sun from inside their own homes. And the hallway was decorated, plants under cheap purple grow lights, somebody's stubborn attempt at something green in a place the sun could never reach. A child's drawing taped to a door, faded almost to white. A crayon house with a crayon family standing in front of it. A string of paper letters along the wall, the kind you buy in a packet for a party, spelling out a child's name, the tape gone yellow and curling. And beneath it, a wall of photographs going back decades. A baby. The same child, a little older. A wedding. Somebody in a borrowed-looking suit. Birthdays with cake and paper hats. Old people who had once been the baby in the first picture. 50 years of one family's entire life. Taped to the wall of a hallway that no government on this earth would ever walk down. A door opened. 9C. An old woman stood there in a cardigan and slippers, a dish towel over one shoulder. She looked at me, a stranger with a flashlight, the first new face up here in who knows how long, and she did not scream, and she did not run. She just looked tired and a little relieved, the way you look when somebody finally lets you set down a thing you've carried too far. Her name was Lorraine. I won't dress up what she told me. And I'll tell you straight, it wasn't much, because she didn't know much. That's the part that hollowed me out. She'd never seen a permit. She didn't know the word interstitial. She had never heard of a slab collapse or a budget line or a memo in faded purple ink. She knew only her own life, the way any of us knows only our own life. She knew she'd grown up on a street with a name, with a stoop she used to sit on as a girl. She knew that the year she was 15, men came and said everyone had to move. It was for a road. It was temporary. The city would take care of them. She knew temporary had lasted the rest of her life. She knew her daughter had been born up here in 1979, and that there was no piece of paper anywhere on this earth that said her daughter had ever been born. No birth certificate. How do you file one for a child born on a floor that doesn't exist? She knew the maintenance men by name. She knew which grow light the tomatoes liked. She knew the groceries came on Thursdays. I asked her, as gently as I knew how, why she'd never just walked out and told someone. She gave me a small, patient smile, with no bitterness in it anywhere, and the missing bitterness was the most frightening thing I have ever seen on a human face. "Out to where?" she said. "And tell them what? With what name? I'm not on anything out there. No card, no number, no paper that I was ever born. You don't walk into the world from a place the world says isn't real." They'd call me a liar first, and then they'd call me a problem. She smoothed the towel on her shoulder. "I've seen what happens to a problem up here. It gets quiet. We were fine as long as we stayed quiet. That was the whole arrangement. Nobody ever said it out loud. We just knew it." She was the last one. Everyone in those photographs, everyone the birthday letters had ever been strung up for, was gone. Moved on or passed on in ways she didn't explain and I didn't ask. The grocery order had thinned to soft food for one because there was one of them left. She asked me for exactly one thing before I left. Not rescue. She was far too old and far too smart for rescue. She asked me to write her name down. Somewhere real. Somewhere it couldn't be erased. I did what I am supposed to do. I need you to believe that part. I wrote all of it up. The 2 permits, 3 weeks apart, the slab, the renumbering, the housing memo, the meters, the riser, the elevator, the work orders, the mail, the grocery ledger, the complaints, the footage. Sal, Lorraine, the most careful report I have written in my life. Every document number, every photograph, and I sent it up the chain. It came back to me 10 days later. Corrected. The elevator timing had been relogged within tolerance. The 49th meter was now house metering. The work orders were legacy numbering errors, and the entire section on the 9th floor was simply gone. Not blacked out. Gone. As though I had never written it. As though a kind colleague had quietly cleaned up an embarrassing mistake before anyone important could see it. A man from the city I'd never met called me. Pleasant. Reasonable. He told me the building had a long history of clerical confusion, that I shouldn't chase paperwork ghosts, that he had a great deal of good work lined up for a careful inspector like me. He never raised his voice. He mentioned on his way off the phone that I really should be careful with that temperamental freight elevator. I had never put the freight elevator in my report, and sitting there in my truck with the phone going dead in my hand, the whole thing turned over and became something I had completely misunderstood from the very first day. I thought I had been the investigator. I thought I'd dug up a buried secret against the system's wishes. I had it exactly backwards. A gut renovation needs a clean existing conditions report to pull its permits. an independent one, a licensed inspector with a spotless record, walking the building, certifying what's there. That report is the legal ground the entire project stands on. They didn't hand that building to some kid. They handed it to me. 26 years, spotless record, a signature the city trusts without reading it twice. They did not need me to miss the floor. They needed me to find it, and then they needed my report corrected back to 8, with my license number still printed at the bottom. Because now there exists a modern, independent, legally binding document signed by a respected professional, swearing under penalty of law that this building has 8 floors and not one thing out of order. In 1972, all they had was a renumbered drawing. Now they have me. My corrected report is the strongest proof that has ever existed that the floor was never there. The more thorough I was, the more honest, the better I worked for them. I hadn't exposed it. I'd helped finish it. I drove past the building months later, scaffolding down, fresh brick, new glass, a banner promising luxury living, 8 floors of it. I should have left it alone. I couldn't. I pulled the renovation drawings, since they're public once the permits issue, and I can read a set of plans better than the man who drew them. New lobby, new units, new mechanicals, top to bottom, and between the 4th floor and the 5th, on the brand new architect's section drawing, in fresh, clean, confident lettering. Mechanical interstitial non-occupiable. They had not demolished the floor. They had renovated around it, rewired it, reinforced it, given the 50-year-old lie a fresh coat and a new professional signature. And when I counted the new unit schedule, it listed 1 more meter than there were apartments. The building was never being cleaned out. It was being re-laundered. Brand new cover story, hidden inside the one place on Earth nobody would ever think to look for an erased floor, a building so new and so expensive that the question could not possibly occur to anyone who goes hunting for a vanished story behind the drywall of a luxury conversion. I went back to the grocer one last time. I don't fully know why. I think I wanted to know how Lorraine's story ended, since there was no other record of her anywhere that I would ever be able to check. The old man pulled the ledger, the standing order to 9, the one that had thinned over 40 years down to soft food for one old woman. It wasn't gone. It had grown again. The newest entries started just a few weeks back, right after the renovation finished. A bigger order, more mouths, and down the list, in the old man's careful hand, the line I had been praying I would never see on that page again. Cereal, the sugar kind, juice boxes, kid food. I didn't ask him a single thing. There was nothing to ask. I just stood there and looked at it, and understood that somewhere above the new gym and the new lobby, behind the fresh drywall of a building that swears it has 8 floors, the math had stopped closing for somebody new. I don't know what happened to Lorraine. I've told myself the soft versions, that somebody finally did right by her, that she's somewhere with a window. I don't believe any of them, and there is no record for me to check, and that was always the genius of the entire design. You cannot account for a person the system was built on purpose to never count. Lorraine asked me for one thing, to put her name somewhere real, somewhere the eraser couldn't reach. I tried, the proper way, with the photographs and the document numbers and my license on the line. They lifted it out as clean as they lift out everything, so I'm doing it here, where they can't reach. Her name was Lorraine. She was born on a street this city tore down, for a road that was going to take care of everybody, and she lived more than 50 years on a floor, This city swears is empty crawl space, and in all that time not one record anywhere in this country ever once admitted she was alive. That's all she ever wanted, not justice, not rescue, just to be on the record, anywhere, even here. So now she is, and there's a beautiful new building on the tired end of this city, 8 floors of luxury living. Families moving in this month, walking their bright new hallways, riding an elevator that takes 1 extra beat between the 4th floor and the 5th. Don't wonder about it. There's nothing up there you can fix, but if you ever ride it, count the seconds, because right now, the only person left who knows how many there are is whoever's up there in the dark, waiting on Thursday's groceries.